After my son's death, I didn't tell my daughter-in-law that he had left me a house, 2 cars. My son's death was the most silent and devastating day of my life. While everyone cried at the funeral, I carried a secret that burned within my chest, something he entrusted to me before he left, and which could change everything. Audrey, my daughter-in-law, was lost in her grief, and I, torn between the instinct to protect her and the fear of losing what, in a way, still connected me to my son. As mourning mixed with difficult decisions, I ended up entering a labyrinth of silent choices that would affect everyone's lives around me. Today I see everything with different eyes. Thank you for being here. Follow my story to the end and tell me in the comments where you are following from. I want to know how far this secret has reached. The call came at 7:43 in the morning. I was still in my pajamas, sitting on the edge of the bed, trying to decide whether to have coffee or go back to sleep. The officer's voice was firm but not cold. He said Mason's name cautiously, as if that could soften the impact. There was no more time for questions. "We're very sorry, Mrs. Taylor. Your husband passed away in an accident." My body froze but my mind raced. I didn't cry immediately. The silence of the room was overwhelming, as if the world had stopped spinning. Mason had left for a 2-day business trip. He had sent me a short message the night before. Now his absence was a hole in the ground. I didn't know if I felt pain, disbelief, or just emptiness. Something inside me refused to accept it. As I mechanically got dressed to go to the hospital, everything seemed like a nightmare. The bathwater ran cold, even with the heater on. I trembled inside as if something was about to break. It was an accident, they said, but my instinct screamed otherwise. Something about that news seemed untold. On the way, I relived our last days, fights, silences, unkept promises. The separation was near, but we still lived together. He didn't seem desperate, but there was a weight in his eyes, as if he was carrying something I couldn't see. The officer's words repeated like an echo inside me. Was it an accident? Or something more? She kept thinking. The hospital smelled of disinfectant and goodbyes. Josephine was there before me, impeccable as always. There were no tears. She didn't even get up when she saw me enter. Her eyes didn't seek mine, and yet I could feel the coldness of judgment there. Clara, my sister-in-law, remained in the background, looking at her phone, indifferent. It was as if my presence was inconvenient, out of place. As if pain was only allowed to real family. I approached the receptionist, trying to control my trembling voice. I asked to see the body, but they told me it wasn't possible yet. Josephine didn't speak. She offered no comfort, didn't ask if I needed anything. She just watched me, like someone evaluating a stranger in forbidden territory. That indifference was cutting. It implied that, for her, my role in that story was over. In another corner of the room, Thomas, Mason's father, looked at the floor as if trying to become invisible. He also said nothing, perhaps out of fear, perhaps out of habit. I, however, felt drowned, surrounded by people but completely alone. It was a kind of solitude that made noise, that squeezed my chest in a slow, cruel way. I realized then that my grief would have no place in that family. There was no hug, no word of comfort. Clara avoided even looking in my direction. When Josephine finally spoke, it was to ask coldly, "Have you told Ethan yet?" As if that were my only remaining function. I shook my head, swallowing back tears. I didn't want to show weakness, but inside I was already in pieces. She looked at me as if to say, "Now you're on your own." Arriving home was like entering a place that no longer belonged to me. The walls seemed colder, the furniture more distant. Ethan ran to me with shining eyes, expecting his father right behind him. When he realized Mason wasn't coming, his expression changed. I couldn't say anything immediately. I just hugged him tight, hoping he wouldn't feel the instability of my embrace. How to explain death to a 6-year-old boy? I tried to maintain routine. I prepared a snack, turned on the TV, distracted my son with old cartoons. But my mind was elsewhere. Something wasn't right. I felt it in the air, in the smell of the house, in the creak of the floorboards. There was a slight disorder in Mason's things. A folder out of place, a half-open drawer. Small details I only noticed because I knew every corner of that home. Someone had been there. In his room, the shirt he wore on the trip was still on the chair. But the computer was off and his cell phone gone. It was strange. Mason always left his cell phone on the desk. I went to the closet and noticed some clothes were no longer there. That could be paranoia, I knew. But there was a chill in my stomach that wouldn't go away. A kind of intuition that insisted on warning me. Ethan appeared in the hallway, holding his teddy bear. "Mommy, is someone here?" he asked innocently. I smiled, shaking my head, but my heart pounded. I closed the door, looked out the window, checked the locks. I tried to convince myself it was grief playing tricks on me, that all of it was just a reflection of my pain. But the feeling didn't go away. Who moved Mason's things before I arrived? The first time Josephine called me after the funeral was to talk about the house. Her voice was polite, precise, without any trace of emotion. She said that, for now, Ethan and I could stay there until things were sorted out. The way she used those words gave me chills. It was as if I was in a place that didn't belong to me, even though it was my son's only roof. Even with all the pain, I understood. It wasn't a gesture of compassion, it was a concession. Her tone left no room for thanks or objections. That wasn't a favor, it was bureaucratic authorization. And yet it hurt. It hurt because I realized that the house where I built a life with Mason, where I saw Ethan take his first steps, was already seen by her as her possession, a kind of conquered territory now under new management. And the cruelest part was that all of this came wrapped in false civility, cold and punctual kindness, as if I were a temporary guest. I walked through the rooms again with this new perspective. I noticed the heavy silence of the walls, Mason's absence, yes, but also the uncomfortable presence of another force. It was as if the house had been repositioned on the board. I remained there but felt like I had been displaced outwards, expelled without physically leaving. With each step, it became more evident that Josephine had never seen me as a legitimate part of the family. And now, without Mason, that truth took shape. Even so, I took a deep breath and tried to carry on. Ethan needed stability, he needed the little that remained. But the tightness in my chest wouldn't go away. That conversation, that tone, everything seemed part of a bigger plan. A plan I couldn't yet see clearly. She spoke as if it all already had an owner. And it wasn't me. It was on a gray afternoon that I noticed the first real absence. An envelope that Mason used to keep in his desk drawer was no longer there. Inside were our income tax receipts, car contracts, and old bills. I searched everywhere, drawer by drawer, and nothing. Then I went to the closet. Mason's clothes seemed fewer. Shirts were gone. The navy blue tie from our anniversary disappeared. At first, I thought it was just my inattention. But I started to make a note. 3 pairs of pants, 2 pairs of shoes, documents, the old watch inherited from his grandfather, all gone. I asked Thomas in an attempt to confide, and he just looked at me, hesitant. His eyes said more than his lips could. "This isn't right," he murmured, but then fell silent. He seemed afraid. Afraid of whom? Ethan also started acting differently. He spent more time in silence, looking into the corners of the room, as if expecting someone to emerge from there. One night, as I was closing the curtains, he whispered, "Mommy, there's someone here. I feel it." My blood ran cold. I smiled, trying to hide my panic, and put him to bed. But I stayed awake late, trying to understand. Was it just grief? Or were we, in fact, being watched? Every sound in the house now seemed louder. A creak, a door closing on its own, the ticking of the old clock. Everything sounded like a warning, as if the house itself was trying to tell me something. I tried to rationalize, but my intuition screamed. Something or someone was manipulating reality around me. What kind of presence is living with us now? It was on an apparently ordinary morning that the envelope appeared. No sender, with my name handwritten. Upon opening it, I found confirmation of a bank transfer. Accounts that were in Mason's name had been transferred to a new holder, Josephine Wilson. These were joint accounts that we both used. Nothing had been mentioned, much less authorized. My heart pounded. That gesture had a name: takeover. I rushed to the office and checked the rest of the papers. Other documents were missing. I tried to contact the bank, but they required a power of attorney or legal presence of those involved. The feeling was clear. I was being left out, excluded in silence, under the guise of legality. But what gnawed at me was not just the content of that envelope. It was the certainty that Josephine had already planned every step. The false kindness at the hospital, the permission to stay in the house, Clara's silence, Thomas's omission. Everything began to fit together like pieces of a dark puzzle. I realized I was being led by a narrative I hadn't written, barely understood. Josephine acted as if everything was under control, as if I were just a stage to be completed. My instinct warned me to stop trusting appearances. Nothing was spontaneous anymore. The words, the gestures, even the silences, everything seemed orchestrated. I began to feel like I had entered a game whose rules I didn't know. But if there was an unwritten rule, it was this. I was no longer part of anything. I was about to discover what had really changed. Clara arrived without warning, as she always did. She carried a polite, but unwarm smile and a thin folder under her arm. She said she wanted to help organize the finances, and handed me a printed spreadsheet, with the title in capital letters, Wilson Taylor Couple's Financial Situation. My stomach churned. There were exact values for accounts Mason had never shared even with me. She knew about credit card debts, car installments, even recent online purchases. I feigned calm as I leafed through the pages, but my heart raced. That spreadsheet was an intimate portrait of our financial life, something I myself wouldn't be able to put together with such precision. I asked where it came from, and Clara dodged the question. It was on Mason's computer. I thought you should know. The tone was too gentle to be trustworthy. And suddenly there was the suggestion. Maybe selling the car would be a good idea. Or at least some furniture to start. The proposal hit me like a punch. Selling my belongings, dismantling the little that remained of my stability. It wasn't help, it was disguised control. Clara smiled as she pushed me towards the abyss. And I, there, trying to stay whole in the face of what was clearly a maneuver. But the worst was still the feeling that they knew my every move before I even made it. As if my life had been ransacked without my knowledge. When Clara left, I left the spreadsheet on the table and sat on the sofa in silence. Ethan played on the floor, oblivious to everything, and I wondered how long I could protect him from that invisible siege. Nothing seemed safe anymore. Not my home, not my privacy. And only then did I realize that what was at stake was much bigger than possessions. They knew more about my life than I did. The call from school came in late morning. The principal was worried. Ethan had cried non-stop and refused to participate in activities. When I arrived, he hugged me tight, his eyes red. The teacher handed me a drawing. In it, several dark figures surrounded a house, and inside a boy cried. There were eyes in all the windows. Open eyes. Eyes that watched. I took the paper home, trying to hide my distress. I asked him what it was, and Ethan replied with disarming simplicity. It's us. And there are people watching us all the time. I felt a chill. That could be childlike imagination, but not after everything I had been feeling. The house was heavy, and now my son noticed it. It wasn't just my anguish. It was real. It was shared. That night, Ethan refused to sleep alone. I put a mattress next to my bed as he asked. While he slept, I stared at the ceiling, the drawing still in my hands. Those eyes seemed to truly stare at me. The feeling of being watched returned with force. It was as if something or someone wanted to silently frighten us. But why? And how far would they go? The next day, I took Ethan to play in the yard, trying to distract him. But the image of the eyes in the windows wouldn't leave my head. I started looking around again, searching for cameras, for cables, for anything hidden. Paranoia grew. But deep down it wasn't madness. It was instinct. My son was showing me what I still didn't see. I decided to go back to Mason's room. I closed the door, opened the closet, and searched in the higher parts, where he used to hide old documents and objects. I found a black box at the bottom of the top shelf, heavy with a rigid fitting. When I opened it, it was empty, but there were clear marks of cables and wires, as if something had been connected there until recently. I stared into the box, trying to imagine what had been removed. Equipment? A recorder? A transmitter? The marks were fresh, dust-free, indicating recent use. The box was locked with a simple key which was no longer there. Everything indicated that someone had been there after Mason's death, even before I returned from the hospital. But who? And what was taken? I sat on the floor, hugging the empty box, trying to process the information. That wasn't Mason's doing. He never hid equipment of that kind. At least not that I knew of. The silence of the house swallowed me at that moment. The box seemed to tell me, you lost more than you imagine. And now the doubt grew. Were they trying to protect me or expose me? It was as if Mason's past was being selectively erased, with terrifying precision. Clothes, documents, and now equipment disappearing one by one. With each new discovery, I moved further away from the idea that everything was coincidence. Something was being carefully covered up. What was disconnected? And by whom? It was an old college colleague who recommended Stella Pierce to me. She said I needed someone firm, experienced but also humane. I scheduled the meeting with a heavy heart, feeling like I was entering new territory. Stella greeted me with an attentive gaze, listening to every detail of my story without interruption. When I finished, she didn't seem surprised, just serious. "You need to understand what's at stake here," she said, crossing her hands on the table. "Will, custody of your son, access to assets. If they are making moves, you cannot stand still." Her demeanor was that of someone accustomed to family conflicts. But when I mentioned Clara's spreadsheet and Ethan's drawings, her eyes narrowed. "What if it's not just a legal dispute?" she asked. That's when Stella said something that chilled me to the bone. "Audrey, maybe you're being watched. And I'm not speaking metaphorically." She explained that, in similar cases, she had discovered hidden cameras, illegal recordings, digital monitoring. I wanted to laugh, to deny it, but my stomach churned, because a part of me already knew. I already felt it. I just needed the courage to see. Before leaving, she reinforced, "If you want to fight for yourself and your son, you need to start now. And with proof." I went home in silence, like someone carrying a heavy secret. Her words hammered in my mind, impossible to ignore. "You might be watched in ways you can't even imagine." I spent that night searching the house with my eyes. Every outlet, every corner, every crack in the wall seemed to hide something. Paranoia took shape. I needed to know if it was imagination or truth. When I entered the bathroom, the mirror caught my attention. The reflection seemed different. I got closer and saw a tiny crack in the upper corner. My heart raced. I touched it carefully, and felt something loose there. With a butter knife, I slowly dislodged the mirror frame. And then there it was. A microcamera pointed directly at the sink. I froze. The shock was like a physical impact. Someone was watching me there in the most intimate place in the house. The feeling of invasion was unbearable. Who would have done that? When? And how many others were there? I held the object between my fingers as if it were a weapon. My thoughts swirled. Mason, Josephine, Clara. All of them? Part of me wanted to destroy it immediately, but the other part knew I needed to keep it. That was proof. It was real. And it meant that it wasn't me who was losing control, it was the world around me that was being manipulated. I sat on the cold bathroom floor, breathless. The camera in my palm seemed to burn. I wanted to run, but I couldn't. Ethan was there, sleeping. I was the only thing between him and this invisible abyss. Everything changed that night, because now it was no longer just a hunch. Someone is documenting my life. For what? The next day, I went to Josephine's house with the camera in my pocket. I faced her impassive gaze with all the strength I had left. "I found this in my bathroom," I announced, showing the object. She looked for a second but showed no surprise. "I don't know what you're talking about," she replied dryly. Beside her, Clara let out a short, almost mocking laugh. "You need help, Audrey," she said, as if comforting a confused child. "You've been emotionally unstable since Mason left." That hit me harder than I expected. Because it wasn't just a provocation, it was a strategy. Clara was planting the idea that I wasn't trustworthy. And Josephine, by remaining silent, endorsed everything. I went home trembling. Not from fear but from indignation. They were arming themselves. And now I saw clearly, the goal was not just to exclude me, it was to discredit me. To paint a portrait of a fragile, paranoid, emotionally unbalanced woman. A portrait that could justify judicial decisions. A meticulous, cruel, and cold setup. I sat on the edge of the bed, breathing with difficulty. This wasn't just about the camera. It was about what it represented. Control, manipulation, the attempt to erase my voice. Now war was declared. And I needed to fight, even if no one believed me. If they wanted me to seem crazy, they were off to a good start. Stella called me for a serious, warning-toned conversation. She had managed to access the will left by Mason. We sat side by side, she with the document in hand, I with a heavy heart. "Audrey, I need you to be prepared for what you're about to hear," she said, before beginning to read. I already imagined something bad was coming, but never something so cruel. The document was clear and unquestionable. Mason left all his assets, including the house, the cars, the accounts, and even objects of sentimental value, to Josephine Wilson. There wasn't a single line with my name. No mention. Not a protective clause. Nothing. I was erased. Disregarded. Excluded from his life as if I had never existed. As Stella explained the possible legal alternatives, my mind shut down. I heard her words as if they were coming from far away, muffled. The pain wasn't just legal. It was emotional, devastating. Mason, even after death, left me with empty hands and a broken heart. The only thing that still connected me to him was our son, and now even that seemed at risk. I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of that definitive abandonment. It was as if I had lived a lie for years. Or worse, as if I had been used and discarded. He erased me from his life, even after death. 2 days later, Clara appeared without warning again. She carried a brown envelope, which she handed over with a cynical smile. "You've been officially notified," she said, as if offering a gift. It was a court summons. Josephine was filing for joint custody of Ethan. The reason? According to her, I didn't provide a safe emotional environment. The words were there, cold and impersonal. Emotional instability, concerning conduct, possible risk to the child. I was paralyzed. The strategy was clear now. They were building a narrative to take everything from me. First the assets. Now my son. Clara watched me in silence, awaiting my reaction. I didn't give her the satisfaction of a scene. I just put the paper away and said goodbye. I closed the door with trembling hands. I stood there for minutes staring into space. The fear now was deeper, more desperate. I could lose Ethan. It was no longer a matter of justice, it was a matter of survival. They wanted to dismantle me piece by piece, and they knew exactly where to attack. I ran to Ethan's room where he slept peacefully. I knelt beside the bed, stroking his hair with silent tears. He was all I had. Everything. And now they wanted to deprive me of even that. Now it wasn't just about me, it was about my son. That night I cried like I hadn't cried since the funeral. I locked the bathroom door, sat on the cold floor, and allowed myself to break down. My body trembled, my breath faltered. No words were enough. No thought could console me. Everything seemed to be crumbling with absurd rapidity. I no longer knew where to find strength. What hurt most was the abandonment. The certainty that Mason had left me defenseless, and that his family was determined to erase any trace of me from his life, and from Ethan's life. I tried to swallow my tears when I heard small footsteps outside. The door opened slowly, and there was my son in pajamas, his eyes watery. He said nothing. He just came to me, hugged me tight and rested his head on my shoulder. It was at that moment that I felt something different. It wasn't just pain. It was also love. It was his presence, small and firm, that anchored me to reality. Ethan didn't need proof or documents. He knew who I was. I hugged my son with all the strength I still had within me, because even in silence he gave me the answer I needed. The truth lived there in that simple gesture. I was still his mother. I was still enough. I would still fight. But he knew. My son knew who I was. After the discovery of the hidden camera, something changed inside me. The feeling of helplessness gave way to silent determination. If they were watching me, I would start watching them too. I bought a simple, discreet camera and began recording my routine, every entrance, every conversation, every gesture inside that house. It wasn't just self-protection. It was an attempt to reconstruct my truth, to have proof if something worse happened. I installed the device in the living room, pointing towards the main door. Then I tested it in the bedroom without Ethan noticing. I started cataloging times, suspicious movements, noises. It was exhausting but necessary. Stella advised me to keep everything saved in separate backups. They already know how to destroy your version of the story. So now you need to build a new one, she said. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was doing something other than resisting. Seeing my life in videos gave me another perspective. I began to notice how I had erased myself, how my expression became withdrawn, cautious. I was no longer the woman I once was, but neither was I the fragile caricature Josephine wanted to paint. The camera became my silent ally, a reflection of the truth, however incomplete. If they would destroy me with images, I would use images to defend myself. Fear was still present, but now it shared space with strategy. I could no longer wait for justice, I would have to provoke it. With proof, with reverse surveillance, with courage. I still didn't know where it would lead, but I knew I couldn't stop. If they have a dossier on me, I will have one on them too. It was on a rainy weekend that Ethan surprised me with a different drawing. Instead of figures or monsters, he drew the house plan. With details. Doors, windows, rooms. And at each point small red circles as if they were targets. There's an eye here. Here too, he said, pointing with his finger. The paper trembled in my hand. It was impossible to ignore that. I sat with him trying to understand. I asked how he knew. I feel it. And sometimes I hear it, he replied with frightening naturalness. The markings matched places where I had also felt discomforts. The corner of the bookshelf, behind the television, the hallway. That wasn't just childlike sensitivity. It was perception. It was instinct. Ethan was seeing what I still didn't have the courage to fully grasp. I hugged my son, thanking him in silence. He was helping me in a way no one else could. While Stella handled the legal part, and I sought evidence with the camera, Ethan brought invisible clues. Intuitions. Maps. His pure gaze became a compass. And even without knowing, he guided me in the darkness. In that invisible war, he was my beacon. I carefully folded the drawing and put it away with the camera recordings. That wasn't just child's art. It was emotional evidence, perhaps even real. A silent testimony. And I realized, with a lump in my throat, that my son saw more than any adult around us. My son was showing me the way. It was during an unexpected visit that Thomas finally broke the silence. He knocked on the door with a bag of bread and anxious eyes. I sat with him in the kitchen in silence for a few minutes. Then he spoke softly, as if afraid of being heard. Audrey, I don't agree with what they're doing to you, but I don't know how to help you. His gaze was sincere but full of fear. He was divided between loyalty to the family and his conscience. He said that Josephine had controlled him for years, that Mason inherited that from her. He said that, in recent months, his son seemed different. Worried. Scared. Talked about changing his life. I absorbed every word like someone collecting clues in a minefield. Thomas hesitated, then took a folded paper from his inner jacket pocket. He gave me this before he traveled. Said that if something happened, maybe you would need it. An address. Just that. I thanked him with a choked voice. Thomas held my hand, squeezing it gently. Be careful, he said before leaving. That wasn't just a gesture of solidarity. It was a silent break from the family's game. And that, coming from him, was immense. I kept the paper with reverence. Perhaps finally a door was opening. Hope ignited again, however timidly. That address could be anything. A clue, a hiding place, a treasure trove of forgotten truths. But it was something. It was a thread to pull. And for someone drowning in silence, that was already a start. He gave me a clue. And perhaps my first chance. I went to the address indicated by Thomas with a pounding heart. The place was a small workshop in the basement of a commercial building, hidden among closed stores. A middle-aged man answered with suspicion, but upon hearing Mason's name, his expression changed. I worked for him. I took care of all the electronic parts of the house, he said, inviting me in. Amidst wires and tools, he revealed what I feared most. Mason had hired his services months before the accident. The request was specific. Installation of hidden cameras at strategic points in the house. When I asked who gave that order, the technician replied without hesitation. It wasn't Mason who asked. It was his mother. My body froze. Josephine had been behind the surveillance all along. Everything I had felt, all the paranoia, was justified. I showed him Ethan's drawing with the marked points. He confirmed those were, in fact, places where the devices were. He even described the models used and how the data was stored on an external server. He gave me the name of where the backup was kept and a technical contact who could help me track the files. With each revelation, the ground beneath my feet seemed to dissolve. I thanked him with a choked voice. It wasn't just a technical confirmation. It was the validation of my sanity. I was never crazy. I was just being watched by someone who wanted to destroy me in silence. She was monitoring me even before his death. With the information in hand, Stella acted quickly. She filed for a preliminary injunction requesting access to the home surveillance data, under the argument of judicial protection. It was a bold step but necessary. The judge authorized an emergency hearing, and Josephine was notified. In court, her lawyers appeared with a superior air, confident. The strategy was obvious. Discredit my word. They claimed that my suspicions were the result of poorly processed grief. They used terms like emotional instability and persecutory fantasies. They stated that there was no technical evidence of any illegal surveillance. But Stella countered firmly, delivering the technician's testimony and a preliminary installation report. The judge listened in silence, taking meticulous notes. Across the room, Josephine kept her gaze fixed on me. Clara whispered something in her ear, as if it were all just a passing nuisance. I felt small but determined. That was my life being debated aloud, and I couldn't lose. If I couldn't prove the existence of the recordings, I would lose much more than a lawsuit. Stella concluded her speech with the serenity of someone who knows what they are doing. This is not about delusions. It's about a woman being watched inside her own home. The judge adjourned the session, promising careful analysis. And I left there knowing that everything was hanging by a thread. If I don't prove it's real, I lose everything. 2 days later, I received an envelope without a sender. Inside, a flash drive. There was no note, no explanations. Just a name handwritten. Watch. I called Stella immediately. We watched it together, sitting side by side, almost without breathing. In the video, I appeared in the living room with Ethan, but there were strange cuts. Missing dialogue. Angles changing senselessly. And then the most absurd scene. I roughly grabbing my son's arm out of context. Stella paused, rewound, analyzed frame by frame. This was edited, she stated. They cut moments and rearranged them to look like something it's not. The montage was grotesque but dangerous. In the right hands, it could be used against me. It was an attempt to incriminate me as a mother, to weaken my image in the custody dispute. And worse, it showed that they were one step ahead. Rage surged like a violent tide. It was as if they were writing a script where I played the villain. A film where my life was manipulated, cut, distorted. But now we had something concrete. Proof of adulteration. It wasn't enough to get rid of me. They needed to destroy me from within. To turn me into what I feared most. A threat to my own son. I took a deep breath, trying to control the panic. This was no longer a silent game. It was a declared war, and they had just launched the first official attack. But I was no longer alone. And with Stella by my side, I would fight back. They are fabricating my destruction. I started waking up in the middle of the night with a racing heart and sweaty hands. The panic attacks came like waves without warning, leaving my entire body on high alert. It was as if my nervous system was screaming that the danger was real, even when everything was seemingly calm. Stella noticed immediately. "You're exhausted, but we're not giving up," she said firmly. And no matter how hard I tried to be strong, anxiety dragged me to dark places. Even with my silence, Ethan noticed everything. He started refusing to go to his grandparents' house, crying and saying he didn't like the way Grandma looked at me. I tried to argue, but he was adamant. There was a sudden maturity in the way he watched me, as if he knew I needed someone by my side. He started sleeping with me every night, holding my hand until he fell asleep. His presence was the thread that kept me connected to reality. Every time anxiety tightened its grip, I remembered his gaze, confident, protective, even at such a young age. And that gave me strength. I wasn't just fighting for myself, but for him. For both of us. For the truth they were trying to erase. And for the first time, I began to see that resistance also came from this side. That I was no longer a passive victim in this game. Ethan unknowingly became my shield. His love my armor. And his intuition my beacon in the midst of chaos. My son started protecting me. Just as I always did him. It was Stella who suggested we use a strategic approach. We knew Clara was trying to control everything behind the scenes, so we decided to test her confidence. One of my witnesses, an old friend from work, was instructed to say she would hesitate to testify. A few days later, Clara approached her with a proposal, money in exchange for silence. But what she didn't expect was that Stella was recording everything. The audio captured every word. Clara offered a sum of cash, mentioned avoiding embarrassment, and even insinuated that no one would believe Audrey anyway. When we listened to the recording together, Stella smiled for the first time in weeks. "Now we have something concrete," she said. It was more than a strategic blow, it was proof of bad faith, a potential scandal. We securely stored the material, ready to use it at the right moment. I felt stronger. It was no longer just my word against theirs. There were facts, recordings, documented manipulations. For the first time we had an advantage. And Clara, so careful until then, had made a mistake. Holding that weapon gave me back control. Even if temporary, it was enough to breathe, to move forward with a little more firmness. A documented lie can be worth more than 1,000 truths without proof. When the doorbell rang late in the afternoon, I thought it was Stella. But it was Josephine, with a bouquet of white flowers in her hands. She wore discreet clothes and a sweet smile on her face. "Can we talk?" she asked. Her tone was calm, almost maternal. She invited me to sit, brought up old memories of Mason, spoke of starting over, of leaving the past behind. All carefully rehearsed. I remained silent, listening to every word as if they were pieces of a speech. There was an artificial sweetness in every gesture, in every pause. She spoke like someone trying to put out fires with perfume. She said she wanted to better understand my pain, that no one should suffer like this. But I saw what was behind that mask: fear. Josephine felt she was losing control. And because of that, she tried to tame me with false affection. When she extended her hand, I didn't touch it. I thanked her for the flowers, but refused any attempt at reconciliation. "Now is not the time," I said, keeping my voice firm. She watched me for a few seconds, serious. Then she stood up, still smiling, and left without saying anything else. That wasn't peace, it was tactics. A pause before the next attack. I closed the door with firm hands. The emotional trap wouldn't work on me. Not anymore. Now I knew who she was. And most importantly, I knew who I was. And that made all the difference. She only offered peace when she felt she was losing. Thomas called me late on a cold afternoon, his voice more tremulous than usual. He asked us to meet at a discreet cafe, away from the neighborhood and the family's eyes. I sat across from him and waited. He took a few minutes to pull something from the inside pocket of his coat, a small, ordinary black flash drive. He placed it on the table like someone handing over a heavy inheritance. "Mason recorded this 2 days before he died," he said. I never had the courage to watch it. I clutched the object between my fingers as if it burned. Thomas couldn't meet my gaze, but I saw regret in every gesture. He asked me to keep it. "In case something happened," he continued. I didn't know what to do. At that moment I understood the burden he carried. It wasn't omission out of malice, it was fear. Fear of what he would discover. Fear of what the truth would demand of him. I sat there, feeling the weight of a secret that had waited too long to be revealed. The flash drive was more than a recording. It was the last chance to hear Mason in his own voice, unfiltered, unmanipulated. It was a key, an answer, perhaps even a plea for help. I squeezed Thomas's hand before leaving. For the first time, he looked at me with sadness and courage simultaneously. I put the device in my pocket like someone protecting something sacred, and I walked back with a pounding heart. "It's all in here." He knew. In Stella's office, we connected the flash drive to the computer in silence. The video began with static and a shaky image. Mason was sitting in our old bedroom, his face drawn, deep dark circles under his eyes and trembling hands. He seemed to be under severe stress. He began to speak without preamble, looking directly at the camera. "If you're watching this, it's because I failed," he said. My heart pounded. He continued. He spoke of family pressures, of his mother, of blackmail involving documents and threats. He said Josephine had been controlling his decisions for years, and now she was pressuring him to rewrite his will. "She wants everything. And she wants to completely remove Audrey from my life." Mason said he intended to change that, but he was afraid. If I die, it wasn't an accident, he concluded. Stella froze the video. She looked at me with wide eyes. This changes everything, she said, almost in a whisper. The content was clear. Emotional coercion, manipulation, fear. A man cornered by his own mother. I didn't know whether to cry, to scream, or to be grateful for finally having such undeniable proof. The truth, even painful, was liberating. And Mason, he had tried. Tears came, inevitable. But it wasn't sadness, it was contained fury about to explode. He tried and he was silenced. And now it was up to me to continue what he couldn't finish. He died without being able to do what he wanted. I held the flash drive in my hands, my eyes fixed on the dark screen. Mason's image still lingered in the air, like a ghost that finally spoke. I cried, yes, but for everything they had taken from me, and for everything he couldn't give back to me. But deep down there was a new spark burning inside me. Anger transformed into impulse. This was no longer just a dispute over possessions. It was a moral reparation. Stella stood up immediately. We're going to prepare a new lawsuit, she said. This changes the entire judicial narrative. We have proof of coercion, we have motivation, and we have a direct connection to Josephine. She spoke with firmness, like someone who already saw the path opening before her. For the first time, the balance of justice seemed capable of being equalized. And I was no longer begging to be heard, I would be heard. With that video, it was no longer the word of an emotionally unstable widow against the controlling matriarch. It was a recorded confession. It was Mason speaking for himself. Even after death, his voice echoed, denounced, asked for justice. And this time I would answer. For me, for Ethan, for everything we lost. And for him. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. There were no more doubts, no more hesitations. The war was now declared. And I was ready to fight. Now, it was justice against Josephine. The courtroom was silent when Stella connected the flash drive. All eyes turned to the screen, and Mason's image appeared. Drawn, trembling but firm. His voice filled the room, narrating his mother's pressures, his fear, the manipulation. The judge requested a pause twice, incredulous at the content. With each new statement, a piece of the truth was exposed like an open wound. Josephine, until then upright, lowered her eyes. She said nothing. Her face paled. Clara, sitting beside her, stood up and left the room in a hurry, visibly shaken. Thomas was also present, downcast but attentive. The video continued to reveal more than any testimony. It showed the soul of a man cornered, entangled by his own family. The revelation was devastating. The silence was heavier than any scream. When the video ended, the judge asked for more time to analyze it in depth. But it was already visible. Josephine's power structure was beginning to crumble there, before her own son's words. That wasn't just a legal document, it was a confession, a farewell, a denunciation. And when I looked at Josephine again, I saw something different. It wasn't just guilt. It was the realization that everything she had hidden was now before the world. They knew. They always knew. The defense tried to react as expected. Josephine's lawyer stood up with false indignation, stating that the video was not concrete proof of anything. This is an emotionally unstable man shaken in a depressive state, he said. But Stella was prepared. She paused the video at strategic points, highlighting dates, names, consistent details. Nothing there was delusion. It was a rational testimony, even amidst fear. The judge intervened. He asked to review specific excerpts. He noted the times Mason mentioned, the documents he cited. There is coherence, he murmured. The defense tried to deflect, but every argument was dismantled by the logic of the images. Mason may have been fragile, yes, but not incoherent. And not untruthful. His eyes said it all. Stella firmly emphasized. This is not an emotional crisis. It is proof of coercion. She also recalled the illegal recordings, the camera in the bathroom, the doctored videos. The narrative built against me now turned against them. The truth finally had form, voice, and image. And it was more powerful than any farce. Gradually, I realized that the court was inclined to listen, really listen. For the first time, my pain was legitimate in the eyes of justice. Not as drama, but as evidence. He wasn't weak. He was cornered. After a few hours of analysis, The judge returned to the room with his decision in hand. His voice was firm, almost solemn. He declared the annulment of the will, recognizing consistent indications of manipulation and psychological coercion. The assets would be frozen until the petition was legally reviewed. More than that, he ordered the opening of a formal investigation into the clandestine recordings in the house where I lived. My heart raced. I looked at Stella, who simply nodded with a slight smile. That victory did not erase what I had been through, but it was a beginning. A new beginning. Josephine did not react. She remained seated, motionless, as if her body already knew that she had lost. The empire of control she built began to crumble. And now it was she who would have to explain herself. I slowly stood up, still in shock but with my head held high. Ethan was waiting outside, and I knew he would notice the difference in my gaze. The fear still existed, but it had receded. The tables had turned, and justice, even if delayed, began to do its work. She lost everything, and she would still answer for much more. Now, I'm curious about you who heard my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you experienced something similar? Support the channel, subscribe, like, comment, and share this video. I'm leaving another story on the end screen that you'll also like, and it will definitely surprise you. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.